Olivia shoved the last camera into her bag and pulled out her phone. 11 missed calls from the city's parking enforcement office. Her chest tightened even before she opened the message. The vehicle has been towed from the hotel's temporary loading zone. Please retrieve it within 24 hours to avoid additional charges. Perfect. Painfully perfect. She had been so focused on the corporate event shoot that she completely lost track of time. The hotel manager had warned her clearly that the temporary zone allowed only 30 minutes, and she had left her car there for 3 hours. Freelance photography never paid much to begin with, certainly not enough to cover stupid mistakes like this. Ethan tugged on her coat sleeve, his little face scrunched with exhaustion. "Mommy, I'm hungry." "I know, sweetheart. We'll find something to eat soon." She tried to keep her voice soft, though her heart felt unbearably heavy. Outside the hotel's glass doors in downtown Chicago, the rain was coming down in sheets. Not the gentle autumn drizzle they had walked through earlier, but a white curtain of water, a pounding torrent, as if someone had tipped an entire lake over the city. The kind of rain that soaks you through in seconds and drives every cab driver off the streets. She opened her wallet. After paying the overdue electric bill and the late fee at Ethan's preschool, she had exactly $43 left. The tow fee alone was $200. Add storage fines for improper parking, she couldn't even bring herself to calculate the rest. And the next payment from her client might take days, maybe weeks, if their accounting department stalled again, the way it always did. Ethan stood pressed against her leg rainwater, dampening his tiny pant cuffs, his soft brown hair already clinging to his forehead. He had sat quietly for hours in the corner as she worked coloring in the book she'd brought from home. He was always patient, too patient for a 5-year-old boy, who should have been in his pajamas by now, already tucked into bed, not shivering in a hotel lobby at 9 on a weeknight. "Let's find somewhere dry to wait," she said, trying to sound certain. The rain would stop soon. It had to. But the moment she said it, she glanced at her phone. The weather app warned the storm would last at least 2 more hours. The cold wind cut straight through her thin jacket. She lifted Ethan into her arms, his small hands icy as he wrapped them around her neck. Across the street, a corner cafe still glowed with warm light. The kind of place with a marble bar, $12 lattes, and patrons in expensive coats, pretending the world outside didn't exist. She had never stepped into places like that. But Ethan was shaking, and she needed somewhere to call for help, anyone. When she pushed open the heavy door, warmth and the rich scent of roasted coffee swept over her, loosening her shoulders in an instant. The cafe was packed, every table taken. Ethan gripped her hand tighter, his eyes lost in the unfamiliar buzz. She scanned the room, desperate. At the back, one table looked empty, but a man sat there alone. Dark coat, slightly curled black hair, eyes quietly observing the room. His gaze paused on her, and the next words that left her mouth would set everything else in motion. "May I sit here?" If this story touched your heart, hit that subscribe button so you never miss our daily heartfelt stories. Drop a like if you want to see what happens next, and share this with someone who needs a little hope today. The man lifted his gaze to her. His eyes were as dark as black coffee, deep and unreadable. He didn't answer right away. That gaze traveled from Olivia to Ethan, paused on the small hands that were trembling, on the wet hair stuck to the boy's forehead, on her thin coat that had already soaked through. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds passed in silence. Then he nodded. Sit. Just a single word. Not an invitation, but an order. His voice was low and even, as if he was used to being obeyed without having to explain himself. Olivia pulled out a chair for Ethan first, then sat down across from the strange man. Up close, she realized he was younger than she'd thought from a distance. Around 35, maybe 36. Sharp features, a square jaw, covered with neatly trimmed stubble-high cheekbones that suggested Italian blood. The black coat he wore looked so expensive Olivia didn't dare guess the price. Before she could manage a thank you, the man lifted a hand. A server appeared at the table immediately, so fast it made Olivia startle. "Hot chocolate for the boy," he said, his eyes still on Ethan. "Extra marshmallows. And tomato soup, something hot." "Yes, Mr. Castellano," the server replied, bowing his head and disappearing. "Wait," Olivia spoke up. "I didn't order. The boy is cold and hungry." He cut her off, his tone calm as if stating a fact no one could argue with. "Are you going to deny that?" Olivia closed her mouth. She wanted to refuse, wanted to say she didn't need a stranger's pity. But when she looked at Ethan, curled in on himself on the chair, his lips faintly purple, from the cold she couldn't force the words out. The truth was sometimes more cruel than embarrassment. "Thank you," she said, her voice smaller than she meant it to be. "I'll pay you back. It's already handled." He leaned back, watching her with a strangely intent focus. Not the look of someone appraising or judging, but something else. As if he was confirming something in his own mind. "You're working the event upstairs tonight." It wasn't a question. Olivia blinked. "How do you know your camera?" he said, pointing at the equipment bag by her feet. The brand logo turned outward, and the way you watch everything. Always hunting for an angle, always framing. A professional habit. The server returned with astonishing speed, setting down a mug of hot chocolate, piled with marshmallows, and a steaming bowl of tomato soup. Ethan's eyes brightened. He looked to his mother waiting, and Olivia nodded. Ethan immediately wrapped both hands around the hot chocolate, the warmth spreading into him until color began to creep back into his pale cheeks. "I'm Olivia," she said, feeling she ought to introduce herself at the very least to the man buying her son dinner. "Olivia Hayes. This is Ethan." "Luca," he answered. "Luca Castellano." The name didn't spark anything in her mind, but he said it like it should. Like he was waiting to see if she recognized it. She didn't. She was busy watching Ethan spoon up soup, watching the color return to her son's face, feeling the knot in her chest loosen little by little. Then Luca did something that made her go still. He drew a business card from the pocket of his suit vest. Her business card. The corner was slightly wet, the headshot printed on it, one she'd taken 3 years ago. "You dropped this," he said, placing it on the table between them. "I looked at your portfolio online. Your work is very good. Natural, not overdone." Olivia stared at the card, trying to remember when she'd lost it. Maybe when her bag spilled as she tried to photograph the chief executive officer cutting the cake. But that meant he'd picked it up, searched her website, looked through her photographs. All in the span of time she'd been panicking about her car getting towed. "I'm looking for a photographer," Luca went on. "My mother's birthday, 65 years old, around 60 guests. I need someone who captures real moments, not staged pictures." "That's very generous," Olivia said, slowly suspicion threading into her voice. "Too generous for a photographer you just met." "I make decisions quickly," Luca replied, his eyes holding hers. "And I pay well for quality work." Is that a problem? He named a number that nearly made Olivia choke. It was more than she typically charged for an entire event, and he was offering to pay in advance. "I'll transfer the deposit tonight," Luca said, as if it were already settled. "You'll see the money in your account tomorrow morning. You don't even have my bank information. Your business card has your website. Your website has a payment portal." He said it as if it were obvious, and it was. But it still made her feel as if he'd looked too far and knew too much. Ethan's soup was half gone, and he began to slump in his chair, fatigue winning out over hunger. "We should go," Olivia said, "so you can have your table back. I'll take you home." She meant to refuse, but Luca was already standing, pulling on the black coat that looked like it cost more than her rent for a month. "It's raining. You don't have a car. You have a tired child." He stated fact, not arguments. "I have a car and a driver. It's practical." He wasn't wrong. And her choices were almost non-existent. She nodded. Outside, a black sedan was already waiting at the curb. Not a taxi, not an app ride. A car with dark tinted windows, and a driver who appeared the moment they stepped out, umbrella in hand, to shield them from the rain. The driver was built like a wall, broad-shouldered eyes, alert in a way that suggested a military or security background. Olivia hesitated at the door, survival instinct, screaming at her about getting into a stranger's car. But Ethan had climbed in, drawn by the dry warmth inside, and Luca waited with patient stillness, rain soaking his shoulders. She got in. The interior smelled of leather and sandalwood, expensive and refined. Luca sat beside her, keeping a careful distance, while Ethan curled up on the seat across from them, his head already starting to droop. For the full 40 minutes of the drive to Rogers Park, Luca said nothing. He didn't pull out his phone, didn't do anything, except exist beside her with a controlled quiet. But now and then, Olivia caught him looking over. Not at her, at Ethan, with an expression she couldn't decipher. The car stopped in front of her building. It looked exactly like what it was, an aging apartment complex on the north side that had seen better decades long ago. Graffiti on the walls, a broken security light, trash gathered in the corners. Luca's expression didn't change as he looked around, and somehow that was worse than if he'd shown disgust. "Thank you for bringing us home," Olivia said, lifting Ethan, now deeply asleep. "And for dinner, and the job. You didn't have to do those things." 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, Luca said, instead of answering her thanks. "The driver will be here. I'll be ready." She carried Ethan toward the entrance. At the threshold, some impulse made her turn back. Luca hadn't left. He sat in the car, visible through the window, watching, making sure she got inside safely. Realizing that did something strange to her chest. It loosened something that had been clenched for months. She lifted a hand in a single awkward wave, then pushed the door open and stepped into the lobby that smelled of dampness and old grease. By the time she laid Ethan on the bed, changed him into pajamas, and tucked him in, it was nearly 11 o'clock. She checked her phone one last time before collapsing onto her own bed. A notification glowed on the screen. Bank deposit. Exactly the amount Luca had promised, already transferred. She stared at it for a long time, proof that tonight was real, that tomorrow she could get her car back, that at least for a short while, the desperate struggle to survive could ease. But under the relief, one question kept gnawing at her. Why? Why would Luca Castellano, whoever he was, decide to help a random photographer and her son in a cafe. What did he really want? Sleep took her before she could find an answer. Tomorrow she would see him again, see his castle, whatever that meant. Tomorrow she could begin worrying about the price of this generosity. Tonight, Ethan was warm-fed and safe. She would take that victory, no matter how temporary it might be. Morning came too fast. A weak wash of sunlight slipped through the thin curtains and fell across the worn wooden floor of the apartment. Olivia had been awake since 6 o'clock, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold in her hands, her eyes fixed on the business card in front of her. Luca Castellano. No title, no company name, only a name and a phone number. She'd turned the card over and over, dozens of times, as if it would reveal something if she stared long enough. In the small bedroom, Ethan was still sleeping. Hard brown hair spilled across the pillow, one arm clutched tight around a threadbare stuffed bear. He looked so peaceful it made her chest ache. She'd promised him a better life, but as she looked around the cramped apartment with its peeling wallpaper, its rusted faucet, and a heater that always broke in winter, she didn't know if she'd kept that promise yet. Memory rushed in, without warning, the way it always did, when she was at her most exhausted. Ryan, with his fury flaring every time he drank the punches, and the screaming echoing through a house saturated with the stink of alcohol. The last time he'd hit her so hard, he broke her ribs, and she'd spent 3 days in the hospital, while Ethan, only 6 months old, cried endlessly in his crib. The night she was discharged was the same night she ran carrying nothing but her son and a small bag. Her mother had died when Olivia was 12, cancer taking her in only 6 months, and her father, drowning himself in liquor to forget his grief, had disappeared when she was 16, leaving her alone to face the world. No one left to lean on, no one to call when she fell. She'd learned how to stand up on her own, but sometimes she was so tired, she only wanted someone to reach out a hand. Her phone vibrated, pulling her out of the current of her thoughts. An email notification. She opened it, and her heart missed a beat. Transfer confirmation, $500. Note to build trust. She stared at the amount proof that last night hadn't been a dream. Luca Castellano, the stranger in the cafe, had actually sent the money the way he said he would. No demands first, no contract to sign, only to build trust. Every survival instinct in her screamed that this was a trap. When something was too good to be true, it usually wasn't true. When strangers offered money, they always wanted something in return. When an opportunity fell into your lap, it was often a snare disguised with care. But then she looked toward the bedroom where Ethan slept on in a child's uncomplicated dream. He deserved more than this, more than a damp apartment, more than dinners of instant noodles. Because his mother couldn't afford meat, more than sitting for hours in the corner of a hotel while she worked. Olivia picked up her phone and dialed the number on the business card before she could change her mind. It rang twice before someone answered. A woman's voice, professional and polite. Mr. Castellano's office. This is Olivia Hayes. Mr. Castellano mentioned a photography job. Yes, Ms. Hayes. Mr. Castellano has informed us. A car will pick you up at 1 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, so you can view the event location. Do you need anything else? Olivia wanted to ask 100 questions. Who is he? Why is he helping me? What am I walking into? But instead, she only said, no, thank you. She ended the call and looked at the business card again. Then she told herself out loud, as if saying it would make it more real, "I'm tired of saying no to every opportunity just because fear has become my habit." She didn't want Ethan to grow up in a world where his mother refused every good thing simply because the past had taught her that good things always came with a price. Sometimes the price of doing nothing was higher than the price of taking a risk. The next afternoon, at exactly 1 o'clock, the black sedan appeared in front of the building. The same car as last night, the same large driver with those watchful eyes. He stepped out and opened the rear door with the practiced courtesy of someone trained for it. "Good afternoon, Ms. Hayes. I'm Victor. Mr. Castellano asked me to make sure you're comfortable." Olivia nodded, taking Ethan's hand and guiding him toward the car. Ethan wore his favorite purple outfit with butterflies on it, insisting he had to look nice when they went to the castle. "Mom, where are we going?" he asked, round eyes, taking in the luxury car. Olivia bent down and smoothed his hair. "Somewhere I don't know yet either, sweetheart. But we're going to find out together." She lifted Ethan, stepped into the car, and the door shut behind them. As the car rolled forward, Olivia looked out through the window, watching the old apartment shrink in the rearview mirror. She didn't know where she was headed, but for the first time in a long time, she chose to move forward instead of standing still inside her fear. The ride lasted nearly an hour, carrying them out of Chicago and deep into the Lake Forest suburbs. The view beyond the window changed by degrees, from tightly packed apartment blocks to streets shaded by trees, from cracked sidewalks to lush green lawns trimmed to perfection. The homes out here were no longer just homes. They were estates hidden behind tall fences and iron gates separated from the outside world, as if they belonged to a different universe. Ethan sat with his face pressed to the glass, eyes wide with wonder at everything sliding past. At last the car turned onto a private drive and an enormous black iron gate rose before them. The gate opened automatically as the car approached, smooth and precise, as if someone was watching from far away. Olivia noticed cameras mounted at multiple points along the fence line, steel glinting under the late afternoon sun. This wasn't just wealth. This was the kind of wealth that needed protecting. Mom, Ethan whispered, awe filling his voice. Is this a castle? Olivia couldn't answer because she was asking herself the same thing. The mansion appeared at the end of the curved drive, 3 stories of imposing gray stone, standing tall amid gardens, tended down to every blade of grass. Rose bushes bloomed along the walkway, a marble fountain sat at the center of the front courtyard, and men in black suits were spaced out at strategic positions, eyes alert as they watched everything. Victor parked at the main entrance. Before he could open the door, Olivia saw a woman gardening to the right side of the mansion. She wore an elegant cream dress, silver hair neatly tied back, at the nape of her neck gloved hands trimming the roses. The woman looked up at the sound of the car, and her gaze stopped on the rear window, on the seat where Ethan sat. What happened next made Olivia freeze. The woman went rigid, one hand flying to her mouth, as if she'd just seen a ghost. The pruning shears slipped from her fingers and fell to the ground. For a few seconds she didn't move at all, only stared at Ethan with eyes stretched wide in shock. Then she turned and hurried into the house, almost running. Olivia heard her voice carry back rapid and urgent Italian, calling a name Olivia recognized. Luca. Victor opened the car door as if nothing had happened. "Please come inside, Miss Hayes, and you as well, young man." Olivia lifted Ethan out unease, sliding under her skin. Something wasn't right. That woman's reaction had been too fierce, too raw for an ordinary meeting. They'd barely stepped into the main hall when Luca appeared from the corridor to the left. He wore gray slacks and a black shirt, looking comfortable and expensive at the same time. Beside him was the woman from the garden, and now Olivia could see her more clearly. She was beautiful in the way women who'd lived a full life. Often were fine lines at the corners of her eyes, telling stories of laughter and tears, a natural elegance rising from every gesture. But her gaze stayed locked on Ethan, and there was something in it that made Olivia want to pull her son close. "Mio Dio," the woman whispered, her voice trembling. "How old is the boy?" The question wasn't meant for Olivia. It was meant for the heir for memory, for someone who wasn't here anymore. Mother Luca said gently, laying a hand on her shoulder, "This is Olivia Hayes, the photographer I told you about, and her son Ethan." The woman blinked as if waking from a trance. She looked at Olivia, then back at Ethan, then gave a faint shake of her head. "I'm sorry. You must think I'm very strange." She tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It's just that he reminds me of someone." "My niece Luca," said, his voice dropping. "Sophia. We lost her 10 years ago." Olivia understood immediately. Ethan was 5. Sophia must have been about that age when she died. Brown curls, big eyes, an innocent smile. Her son was the shape of a child who'd been lost, and this woman had just seen her niece's ghost in Ethan's face. "I'm so sorry," Olivia said, words that were familiar and never enough. Elena, the older woman, introduced her name, nodded slowly. Then she crouched down until she was level with Ethan's eyes. "Hello, little one. Do you like hot chocolate?" Ethan looked to his mother for permission, and when Olivia nodded, he smiled brightly. "Yes, ma'am, I do." That smile seemed to crack something inside Elena. Her eyes shimmered with tears, but she turned away quickly, pretending to adjust her pearl necklace. Victor led Olivia and Ethan through long corridors lined with oil paintings and Persian rugs, finally stopping in front of a spacious room flooded with natural light. This was the temporary studio they'd prepared for her, and when Olivia stepped inside, she had to swallow back a gasp. The most professional photography equipment she'd ever seen was arranged with careful order. Softbox lights, backdrops, a backup camera, body lenses in every focal length. All of it high-end, the kind she only dared to dream about. On sleepless nights, she stood in the middle of the room, her fingertips brushing the edge of a lens, still sealed in its box, feeling as if she'd walked into someone else's dream. A dream too beautiful, too perfect, too distant from her life of instant noodles and overdue bills. Through the window, she could see Elena seated on a stone bench in the garden, Ethan running around the fountain under Victor's watchful eye. The older woman watched the boy at play, and on her face was an expression Olivia couldn't read. Not happiness, not exactly sorrow, but something so deep it had become part of her soul pain that had settled in and made a home there. Something wasn't right here, something they hadn't told her. And when she turned back to the flawless studio, a question began to gnaw at her mind. Why would a family, this powerful need, an unknown photographer from North Side, when they could hire anyone in the world? Elena insisted they stay for lunch, and Olivia couldn't find any reason to refuse. Or rather, she didn't want to refuse. There was something in the older woman's eyes when she looked at Ethan, a quiet longing Olivia couldn't bear to take away. They sat in a grand dining room with a soaring ceiling and tall glass windows that looked out over the garden. The oak table could have seated 20 people, but today only 4 chairs had been placed close together at one end, creating a pocket of warmth inside all that luxury. A little girl about 6 years old appeared from the kitchen, black hair braided into 2 pigtails' round eyes, fixed on Ethan with open curiosity. "This is Bianca," Elena explained. "Our housekeeper's daughter. She can play with Ethan while we wait for lunch." The 2 children stared at each other for a moment. Then Bianca took Ethan's hand and tugged him away, already showing off her doll collection in the corner of the room. Their laughter rang out clear and carefree, as if the outside world and its pain and secrets didn't exist at all. Elena watched them with eyes that shimmered, then turned toward Ethan when he ran back to the table for water. "Would you like to learn how to fold a napkin into a swan?" she asked, her voice sweet as honey. Ethan nodded eagerly, and for the next 15 minutes, Olivia sat in silence watching Elena patiently guide her son, step by step. Her wrinkled hands closed gently around his small fingers, shaping each fold with a care and tenderness Olivia could feel. Maybe this was how she'd taught Sophia. Everything seemed peaceful, too peaceful. Late afternoon light poured through the glass. Children's laughter echoed, and the kitchen sent out the rich smell of food. Olivia began to think she might have worried too much. Maybe this was simply a normal wealthy family that needed someone to photograph a party. Maybe there was no dark secret waiting. Then the slam of a door shattered it all. Unsteady footsteps echoed over the marble floor, heavy and uneven. Olivia turned just as a man appeared in the dining room doorway. He was a few years younger than Luca, with the same sharp lines to his face, but softened less angular. Handsome in the way men born into old money often were. But that beauty had been wrecked by bloodshot eyes clothes, rumpled as if he'd slept in them, and the sharp stink of alcohol that rolled off him with every step. "She's replacing her." His voice was shrill, his finger stabbing straight toward Ethan. "She's replacing Sophia with some nameless kid she picked up off the street." Elena shot to her feet, the chair scraping back with a harsh squeal. Her voice was sharp as a blade. "Marco, you're drunk at midday, again. At least I still feel something." Marco laughed bitter, the laugh of a man who'd been broken a long time and no longer wanted to be repaired. "At least I'm not pretending everything's fine. Not like you. Not like my perfect big brother." Olivia stood as well, her protective instinct surging. Ethan had stopped playing round eyes wide with fear as he stared at the stranger, shouting like a madman. Bianca went still, too hiding behind a chair. The air in the room thickened heavy and suffocating. "You should go sleep it off." Elena said, her tone still firm, but Olivia heard the pain underneath. "Don't make a scene in front of guests." "Guests," Marco spat the word like a curse. "You call them guests. You're trying to use this boy to fill the hole Sophia left, and you call them guests." Then the temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. Olivia felt the shift before she even saw Luca. He entered from the hallway, each step measured and solid, unhurried, and yet carrying absolute authority. His face showed nothing, but his dark eyes were ice cold. "Get out." Just 2 words, no explanation, no reason. Pure command, absolute and impossible to resist. Marco turned to face his brother, a crooked smile twisting his mouth. big brother's here. Here to throw me out of the house Father left to both of us. Father left the house to me." Luca replied, his voice so calm it was cruel. "Father left you an allowance you've already drunk through twice." Victor appeared behind Luca, a wall of muscle, silent but threatening. Marco looked from his brother to the bodyguard, and Olivia saw the defiance in his eyes sag. Not from fear, but from exhaustion. "This is what we've become." Marco looked around the room, at Elena, at Ethan, at everything, his gaze soaked in bitterness. "Father would be ashamed. Father would be ashamed of what you've turned yourself into." Elena said, her voice trembling but steady. Silence held for a few seconds, heavy as lead. Then Marco turned on his heel, staggered away, and vanished into the hallway. A door slammed somewhere deeper in the house, the sound echoing through the quiet. Olivia looked down and saw Ethan pressed into Elena's lap, his face buried in the fabric of her dress, his whole body trembling. Elena wrapped her arms around him, rubbing his back in slow circles, whispering comfort in Italian. Olivia didn't understand, but could feel in the gentleness of it. "Marco hasn't been well since we lost Sophia," Elena said after a long moment, her voice worn, as if she'd just survived a battle. 10 years and he's still drowning. 10 years. Olivia went still. The little girl had been gone 10 years, and her family still hadn't made it out. What kind of grief was deep enough to swallow a person for a full decade? "I'm sorry you had to see that," Olivia said. "It's family, we probably should." "No," Elena cut in, her voice suddenly firm again. "You'll stay. We'll eat lunch like civilized people. Marco isn't allowed to ruin anything else." She looked down at Ethan, still curled in her arms, and her gaze softened. In that moment, Olivia didn't see replacement, didn't see obsession with the dead. She saw grandmother trying to heal by loving another child, and maybe that wasn't a bad thing. Maybe it was simply how broken hearts learn to beat again. Lunch unfolded in a tense silence, but Elena was determined to keep up the appearance of normal. She talked with Ethan about school, about his favorite foods, about the books he liked to read. Little by little, the air softened, and by the time dessert was served, Ethan had completely forgotten the drunken man from earlier laughing with Bianca about the shape of the cake. After the meal, Luca rose and turned to Olivia. "You should see the event space, so you can plan the shoot?" Olivia nodded and stood to follow him. Elena lifted a hand to stop her when she reached for Ethan. "Leave the boy here with me. Bianca will play with him. You go do your work." There was something in Elena's voice that made Olivia unable to refuse. Maybe it was that quiet yearning. Maybe it was the loneliness of a grandmother who had lost her only grandchild. Olivia looked at Ethan, laughing with Bianca, then nodded. Luca led her through long corridors, finally stopping before a wide room with 3 walls of glass looking out onto the garden. A sunroom. Natural light flooded in from every direction, soft and perfect for photographs. Olivia immediately pulled out her notebook and began to write. The southwest corner would be ideal for portraits in the afternoon, when the sunlight slanted through the glass and created a hazy, dreamlike effect. The northeast corner would work for group photos, enough space and even light. She walked the room, picturing how the tables might be arranged where a backdrop could go if needed, the spots she could stand to shoot without disrupting guests. "Around 60 people," Luca said from behind her. "The tables will be arranged in a U shape. My mother likes an intimate feel even with a large number of guests." Olivia nodded, still writing. but she could feel his eyes on her, heavy and thoughtful. When she looked up, Luca had moved to the window, gazing out at the garden where Elena and the two children sat on a stone bench beneath the branches of a maple tree. Sophia was 4, he said abruptly, his voice low and distant. Marco's daughter. There was an incident, a territorial dispute with a rival organization. Olivia went still. Organization, not a company, not a business, organization. The word rang in her mind like an alarm bell. Sophia was caught in the crossfire. Luca continued, his eyes still on the garden. A restaurant we owned. The gunman didn't care about collateral damage. He paused, his jaw tightening. Sophia's mother survived, but never recovered. She ended her own life 2 years later. Olivia didn't know what to say. She stood there with a notebook in her hand, feeling as if she'd just been pulled into a world she didn't belong to. A 4-year-old child dying in gunfire, a mother taking her own life because she couldn't bear the pain, and the man in front of her, the man who had bought her son hot chocolate in a cafe, was somehow tied to all of it. "That wasn't your fault," she said, her voice softer than she intended. Luca turned, his dark eyes darker than before. "I was 24. I'd only taken over from my father 6 months earlier. I thought my name was enough to protect my family." He shook his head slowly. "I was wrong." Silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. Olivia knew she should stop here, not ask more, not dig deeper. But the question was already on her tongue, and she couldn't swallow it back down. "What do you do, Luca?" He watched her for a long moment, unreadable. Import and export, logistics, security consulting, different areas. Each word was so vague it could have meant anything, or nothing at all, or exactly what she was afraid it meant. Olivia opened her mouth to ask more, but Luca continued, his voice lower. "The Russians, the ones responsible. We pushed them out of Chicago, but they're still out there." He stared out the window, his gaze far away. "And there are other families in Europe, Italy more specifically. The Bellini family controls Naples and most of the Mediterranean routes. We have an understanding, for now." "For now," Olivia asked before she could stop herself. "In my world, understandings can change overnight." Olivia looked at him, then at the garden beyond the glass, at Elena holding Ethan on the stone bench. She didn't ask anything else, not because she didn't want to know, but because she wasn't ready for the answer. Sometimes the truth was the kind of thing that once known could never be unknown, and she needed more time before deciding whether she wanted to step through that door. Victor appeared in the doorway and knocked lightly to announce himself. Sir Mrs. Castellano would like to ask Ms. Hayes to take a few photos. Luca nodded, and they went out into the garden. Elena was raising her hand, still holding Ethan's. "I want one photograph," she said to Olivia. "Me and the boy, under that maple tree." She pointed toward a large maple in the corner of the garden, its leaves blazing red in the afternoon sun. "Luca knows the place. That's where Sophia used to sit with me." Olivia glanced at Luca. He gave a small nod, but his eyes said more than words: pain, memory, and maybe a fragile thread of hope that new photographs could soften an old wound. Olivia took out her camera and followed them toward the deep red maple, the place where a 4-year-old girl had once sat laughing with her grandmother before the darkness of the adult world swallowed her forever. The next day, the garden behind the estate was transformed completely. Rows of white lanterns floated between the tree branches. Cream silk tablecloths covered the banquet tables, arranged in a U shape, just as Luca had described, and roses spilled from crystal vases set everywhere. This wasn't an ordinary birthday party. This was a statement of power and wealth disguised beneath a polished, elegant surface. Olivia arrived 2 hours early to prepare to check the light and choose her angles. Ethan had been kept with Elena since yesterday afternoon, and the boy seemed happy with the arrangement. Olivia tried not to think about her son, growing more attached to this family, a family she still didn't fully understand. Guests began arriving at 6 o'clock. Around 60 people, exactly as Luca had said, but none of them looked ordinary. Men wore perfectly tailored suits. Women wore jewelry Olivia could only estimate in terms of an entire year of her income. They moved with the confidence of people who'd never had to worry about money, never had to count out every last dollar to buy milk for a child. Olivia began to work, moving slowly through the garden, capturing natural moments among the guests. But the more she watched, the more she noticed what was strange. Some men never strayed from the exits. They stood there with arms folded or hands in their pockets, eyes constantly sweeping the crowd. Not guests, security, and the bulges under their suit jackets definitely weren't wallets. She passed a group of men talking near the bar. Their conversation stopped abruptly when she came close, only resuming after she'd moved on. It happened more than once. Every time she approached a cluster of people, the air changed. Voices dropped, eyes sharpened, as if they were hiding something she wasn't allowed to know. And then there was the way they treated Luca. Not openly deferential, not groveling, but there was a respect that edged close to fear in every handshake, every nod. Men 10-20 years older than him still leaned in when they spoke to him. Women lowered their eyes when he passed. Luca Castellano wasn't just a wealthy businessman. He was something else, something far more dangerous. About an hour after the party began, Olivia went inside the house to find a new angle. She wanted a few shots from the sunroom window. Looking down onto the garden, the sunset would create a beautiful shimmer. But as she passed a small room at the end of the hallway, she heard voices. Marco. He stood with his back to the door, facing two men Olivia didn't recognize. All three looked tense, their body language edged with confrontation. Olivia knew she should keep walking. Don't eavesdrop, don't be curious. But instead of turning away, she stopped beside the door, pretending to adjust her camera lens. Her heart pounded so hard, she was afraid they'd hear it. The shipment from Russia is 3 days late already, Marco said, his voice rough with irritation. Volkov is losing patience. Russia, Volkov, shipment. The words drilled into Olivia's mind like shards of glass. She remembered what Luca had said yesterday. The Russians, the ones who killed Sophia, a territorial dispute, a rival organization. Your brother won't be happy. One of the men said, his tone carrying a hint of threat. Luca is never happy. Marco shot back bitter, but this is my job, not his. The second man suddenly looked up, and his eyes met Olivia's through the narrow crack of the door. His face went cold immediately. He said something in Italian, sharp and alert. Marco turned. His bloodshot eyes locked onto her. In that instant, time seemed to freeze. Olivia turned away at once and walked quickly toward the sunroom, her heart hammering wildly inside her chest. She raised her camera and snapped a few hurried photos of the desserts on a nearby table, doing her best to look natural. But her hands shook, and she knew they'd seen her. The rest of the party moved past as if through fog. Olivia kept working, kept moving and photographing, but everything had changed. Every face now carried a sense of threat. Every laugh sounded like it was hiding a secret. She understood now. Luca Castellano wasn't just rich. He was Mafia. Import and export, logistics, security consulting. The vague words he'd used yesterday took on an entirely new meaning. And she, Olivia Hayes, a single mother from the city's edge, with $43 in her wallet, had brought her son straight into his world. She looked out into the garden where Elena sat on a stone bench with Ethan beside her. The boy was smiling, wearing a new sweater Elena had bought him. Elena rested a hand on his shoulder, her eyes turned toward the horizon where the sun was setting. Olivia lifted her camera and pressed the shutter. It was the most beautiful photograph of the day, golden orange sunset light, wrapped around grandmother and grandson, creating a warm halo. Elna looked peaceful for the first time since Olivia had met her, and Ethan, her son, looked as if he belonged here. But Olivia didn't feel peaceful anymore. She'd seen too much, heard too much. The secret now sat in her hands, heavy and dangerous, and secrets always came with a price. The only question was what that price would be, and who would have to pay it. The party ended around 10 o'clock that night. Guests left with laughter and congratulations. Luxury cars rolling out one by one through the iron gates. Olivia stayed behind to pack up her equipment in the studio, trying to make her hands stop shaking. She needed to get out of here, needed to take Ethan home, needed to forget everything she'd heard and pretend none of it had happened. But just as she zipped her camera bag closed, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Luca stood there, hands in his pockets, his face unreadable in the low light. "You saw something tonight," he said. "Not a question. Something that made you uneasy." Olivia could have lied, could have pretended she didn't know what he meant. But she was too tired of pretending, and Luca's eyes made it clear he knew exactly what she'd witnessed. "Your brother was talking about the Russians and a shipment," she answered plainly. "Those aren't words that belong to a story about legitimate business." Silence stretched between them. Luca didn't look surprised. He didn't deny it. He didn't try to explain. He only stood there watching her with steady, dark eyes. "What conclusion did you come to?" he asked. "That I should finish this job and never come back?" Olivia said, her voice harder than she meant it to be. "Take Ethan and keep my distance from whatever this is." Silence again, longer than the last. Then Luca nodded slowly. "Come with me. We should talk somewhere private." He didn't wait for her answer. He turned and walked away. And though every instinct in her screamed to run, Olivia followed. Down long corridors, up a staircase, into a room she hadn't seen before. Luca's office. A dark room with bookshelves rising to the ceiling, an oak desk set in front of a window that looked out over a garden now swallowed by night. A map hung on the wall, family photographs, and a glass liquor cabinet holding bottles of expensive whiskey. Luca went to the cabinet, poured 2 glasses, and handed one to her. Olivia didn't drink. She set the glass down on the desk, keeping distance between them. "You know exactly what you saw," Luca said, taking a sip. "What we are, what I am, then let me leave." Olivia tried to keep her voice steady, but her heart was racing. "I won't tell anyone anything. I just want to keep Ethan safe." Luca set his glass down and looked at her. His gaze wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either. It was something in between, practical and calculated. "You've been in my house twice," he said slowly. You've met my family, my associates. You know where I live, what kind of security I keep. You've taken photographs of men who prefer to stay unseen. A chill ran down Olivia's spine. So I'm a security risk. You're going to make sure I disappear. Don't dramatize it. Luca gave a small shake of his head. I'm saying you're connected to me now, whether you wanted that or not. That means you're under my protection. Olivia blinked, not sure she'd heard him correctly. Protection? Yes. What does that mean in practice? Luca stepped closer and stopped a few feet away. You have my phone number. If there's any problem, anything at all, you call me. Victor or one of my men will check in from time to make sure you and Ethan are safe. And if anyone threatens you, anyone you call me before you call the police. And in return, Olivia asked, her voice trembling slightly. In return, you live your life, work, raise your son. The only thing I require is discretion about what you know. Olivia looked at him, at this luxurious room, at the world she'd stumbled into by accident. She thought about Ethan sleeping somewhere in this estate, safe and warm. She thought about the damp apartment in Rogers Park, the sleepless nights worrying about the life she'd tried to build from the ashes of her past. This is a cage, she said at last, gilded but still a cage. That's the difference between being a target and being protected. Luca tilted his head slightly. Which one do you choose? She didn't answer. She didn't agree, but she didn't refuse either, because deep down she knew she didn't have many choices. Walking out of here without Luca's approval wasn't possible, and even if it were, where would she go? Back to her old building with no real security where anyone could find her. Ethan makes my mother remember what we lost. Luca said, his voice softening just a fraction. That makes you part of the family, whether you meant to be or not. He stepped closer, dark eyes locking onto hers. And I protect what's mine. That last sentence echoed in the quiet room, heavy with weight and meaning. Olivia knew she should feel afraid. She knew she should run, find a way out of this web before it tightened any further. But instead, a part of her, the part that was exhausted from fighting alone, felt something close to relief. She'd been alone for too long. And now, whether this was a prison or a paradise, at least she wasn't alone anymore. I need to take Ethan home, she said, her voice steadier now. Victor will drive you, Luca replied. And Olivia. She paused at the door and looked back. Thank you for being honest with me, he said. Most people would pretend they didn't see anything. She didn't know whether that was praise or a warning. Maybe it was both. She nodded once, then left the room, carrying the weight of secrets she could no longer set down. 3 weeks passed in a quiet that felt suspicious. Olivia returned to her normal life, or at least the version of normal she could build. She took a few small photography jobs, walked Ethan to school each morning, cooked dinner in the cramped kitchen of her apartment. Everything looked the way it had before, except that now and then she noticed a black car parked at the corner, and Victor would give her a small nod each time she passed. Luca's protection, silent but always there. Elena called 3 times during the first week, inviting Ethan to come visit. Her voice was full of hope, and Olivia could hear the loneliness tucked beneath each invitation. But Olivia said no. The first time because Ethan had a mild cold. The second time because she had urgent work. The third time because the school had an extracurricular activity. Small lies, but she needed distance. The farther she stayed from the Castellano family, the safer she'd be. or at least she wanted to believe that. Then the letter came. Olivia found it in her mailbox on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon, mixed in with bills and grocery flyers. A white envelope, no return name, but the postmark made her blood go cold. State Prison in Joliet, Illinois. Her hands shook as she tore it open. She knew who it was before she even saw the familiar sloppy handwriting. Olivia, my lawyer, says I'll be out in 2 weeks. Early release for good behavior. We need to talk about Ethan. He's my son, too. My family has hired legal representation to file for joint custody. You can't keep him from me. See you soon. Ryan. The world tilted under Olivia's feet. She had to brace herself against the wall to keep from falling. Ryan was getting out. Ryan wanted Ethan, his family, the wealthy people who'd cut her off the moment she ran, were now spending money to take back their grandson. She remembered the last time she'd seen Ryan behind the courtroom glass, hatred burning in his eyes as the sentence was read. 3 years for aggravated assault, after he'd beaten her until her ribs broke and her spleen ruptured. 3 years, and now he was about to be free. Ethan came home from school an hour later, grinning as he held up a drawing he'd made in class. Olivia hugged him so tightly he had to push back just to breathe. She didn't say a word about the letter. She couldn't. How did you explain to a 5-year-old that the father he didn't remember was trying to take him away? That night, after Ethan fell asleep, Olivia started making calls. First, the free legal aid line she'd used when she filed for the restraining order. They transferred her through 4 different people before anyone who could help finally came on the line. Custody disputes are complicated, the attorney said, professional, but not without sympathy, especially when the other side has financial resources. Does the boy's father have money? His family does. They'll pay whatever it takes. Then you need private counsel. Our office handles criminal matters, but custody requires a specialist in family law. I can refer you to a few, but they're not cheap. Not cheap means how much the initial retainer is about $15,000. More if it goes to court. $15,000. Olivia had about $3,000 in savings, most of it from the work she'd done for Elena. Not enough. Nowhere near enough. She called every number she'd been given, 5 different lawyers. Each call ended the same way. No one would take the case without a large retainer. No one cared about her circumstances. In the legal world, money decided justice, and she didn't have money. Near midnight, Olivia sat on the kitchen floor with her back against the refrigerator, tears running down her cheeks. Her phone lay in her hand, the contact list open, the screen lit in the darkness. Luca's name was there, waiting. Don't call. A part of her pleaded. The more you get involved with him, the more dangerous it becomes. This is Mafia. This is the kind of world where people die in gunfire, where 4-year-olds get shot in restaurants. But then Ethan's face rose in her mind. The trusting smile every morning when she woke him up. The small hand gripping hers as they crossed the street. The sweet voice saying Mom whenever he needed something. She couldn't let Ryan take him. She couldn't let Ethan grow up with the man who'd nearly killed his mother. Her finger dialed before her mind could stop it. The phone rang once, twice, then Luca's voice came through awake, even though it was nearly midnight. Olivia, I need help. Her voice cracked, all restraint collapsing. I wouldn't call if I had any other choice, but there isn't one. And Ethan, slow down, Luca, cut in calm but urgent. What happened? She told him everything. The letter, Ryan's early release, the lawyers, and the $15,000 she didn't have. The fear that she was going to lose her son, the child she'd sacrificed everything to protect. Luca was silent for a few seconds after she finished. Then he asked, his voice sharp as a blade, "Your address, right now." "What? Give me your address. I'm coming. 30 minutes. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me." Olivia gave him the address, her voice shaking. Luca hung up without another word. She sat there in the dark of her small kitchen, counting each minute as it crawled by. 20 minutes, 25, 28. Headlights swept across the window, throwing light onto the opposite wall. An engine cut off, footsteps on the stairs, then a knock at the door, soft but certain. Olivia stood, wiped her tears, and went to open the door to the man she'd been trying to stay away from for 3 weeks. Luca stepped into the apartment, and the small space seemed to shrink around the sheer force of his presence. He wore a black coat, his hair slightly tousled, as if he'd been pulled from sleep, but his eyes were fully awake. They swept the room with the efficiency of someone who'd practiced 1,000 times marking the windows, the fire escape, the blind corners, everything that could be a threat or an advantage. Olivia realized this wasn't the habit of a businessman. This was survival instinct. "Where's Ethan?" he asked, his voice low. "Asleep. He doesn't know anything about this." "Good, let me see the letter." Olivia handed him the envelope. Luca read quickly, his face blank, only his jaw tightening when he reached the last line. He folded the letter, slipped it into his coat pocket, then pulled out his phone. "Victor, I need someone watching this building, rotating shifts. If Ryan or anyone connected to him comes within 2 blocks, I want to know immediately." He ended the call before Victor could answer. "You can't just post people outside my apartment," Olivia protested, though her voice was weaker than she wanted. "Your landlord works for a property management company." "I do business with," Luca replied evenly. "There won't be a problem." She looked at him, not sure whether to feel protected or violated, maybe both. As for a lawyer, Luca continued, "I have a firm on retainer, family law specialists. They handle sensitive matters for my associates. I can't afford that. You won't pay." He cut her off. "This is personal." Olivia stared at him, trying to understand. This man, the Mafia boss she'd tried to avoid for 3 weeks, was standing in her miserable apartment close to 1 in the morning, arranging security and lawyers as if she were family. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked, her voice more honest than it had been in a long time. Not the explanation about Elena or Sophia. "Why do you care what happens to us?" Luca was silent. He turned his back to her and stared out at the black window. When he spoke, his voice was different, deeper, heavier, as if each word carried the weight of years. "When I was 17, I had a little sister, Isabella, Bella. She was 13. The past." Olivia understood instantly. Not "I have," but "I had." Her chest tightened. There was a dispute with a rival family, the Russians, the same ones my brother mentioned at the party. They wanted territory my father controlled. He refused to negotiate. Luca paused and drew a long breath. They retaliated by targeting Bella. They took her after school, held her for 3 days. He turned back toward Olivia, and she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Pain, raw, unhealed. When we found her, his voice caught. She didn't survive what they did to her. A heavy silence poured into the room. Olivia didn't know what to say. No words were big enough for a loss like that. My father became someone else after that. Luca continued, his voice steadier now, but still bitter, cruel, paranoid. He died 5 years later of a stress-induced heart attack. Left me in charge at 22. He stepped closer, dark eyes locking onto hers. I swore I'd never let anyone under my protection go through what Bella went through, that I'd use every resource, every advantage to keep my people safe. He looked away, jaw clenched. Then Marco's daughter Sophia died, despite every promise I made. When he looked back at her, Olivia saw the naked truth in his eyes. So yes, I'm protecting you and Ethan, but this isn't charity, this is redemption. Trying to save someone I can save when I couldn't save the ones I lost. Olivia stood there looking at the man in front of her. Not a cold Mafia boss, not a dangerous manipulator, just a man who'd lost too much trying to make up for it by protecting what remained. She stepped forward without thinking and took his hand. Luca went rigid for a second, as if he wasn't used to being touched. Then his fingers closed around hers, gripping tight, as if afraid she'd vanish if he let go. "You can't save everyone," she said softly. Luca looked at her, and for the first time, she saw a small smile flicker at his mouth. Not a happy smile, but the smile of someone who'd accepted a bitter truth. "No, but I can save you." The next few weeks passed like a dream Olivia didn't dare believe was real. Luca's lawyer Victoria Hale neutralized Ryan's petition before it could even become a problem. Ryan's attorney backed off after Victoria presented a complete file on his history of violence evidence. Olivia didn't know where it came from and didn't ask about. One evening, Luca told her in a calm voice Ryan accepted the deal. No custody, no contact. In exchange, certain information about what he's been doing in prison won't reach the parole board. Olivia didn't ask what the information was. She only knew Ryan would never lay a hand on Ethan again. Sometimes that was all that mattered. "Your apartment isn't safe," Luca said on the third day after that night. "You and Ethan should move here at least temporarily." Olivia wanted to refuse, wanted to hold on to the independence she'd fought for. But when she watched Ethan playing with Bianca in the wide garden, his laughter drifting through the rose bushes, she couldn't say no. They moved into the Castellano estate that weekend. Life here was nothing like anything Olivia had known. Ethan and Bianca became inseparable, racing through the garden, playing hide-and-seek in the long hallways, whispering childhood secrets adults weren't allowed to hear. Elena taught Ethan Italian every morning. Buongiorno for good morning, grazie for thank you, ti voglio bene for I love you, grandma. He learned with surprising speed, and before long he began calling Elena Nona grandmother, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. One afternoon, Olivia was preparing a snack for Ethan in the kitchen when Marco appeared in the doorway. This time he was sober, eyes clear clothes, neat, no smell of alcohol. "I owe you an apology," Marco said, his voice rough. "About that day, lunch, I wasn't myself." Olivia didn't know what to say. This was the man who'd called her son, some nameless kid picked up off the street. Marco looked out toward the garden where Ethan was playing with Bianca. "He's a good boy. Sophia would have liked him." Then he turned away and walked off his steps, heavy, as if he carried the whole world. Olivia watched him go, something strange rising in her chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe pity. And then there was Luca. He appeared at unexpected moments, as if he was being pulled toward them by something he couldn't control. One afternoon he walked into the kitchen while Olivia was making sandwiches for Ethan. Without a word, he took a knife and began slicing fruit, his movements practiced as if he'd done it his whole life. Ethan climbed onto a tall chair beside Luca and whispered something into his ear. Luca leaned in to listen, then laughed. A real laugh, not a thin smile or polite social chuckle. It came from deep in his chest, softening a face that usually knew only control and vigilance. "He wants bananas with peanut butter." Luca translated, his eyes still bright. It was the first time Olivia had ever seen him like that, and she realized she'd fallen in love with him without noticing when it happened. That night, after Ethan was asleep, Luca took Olivia out for ice cream at a small shop 20 minutes from the estate. They sat in the car. After they got back, Ethan curled up on the back seat, and Luca told her more about Bella, about birthdays they used to share, about the way his sister would tease him, about the grief he'd carried for 19 years and had never truly eased. Olivia didn't think. She leaned over and kissed him. Luca went still for a second, his body tightening as if he couldn't believe what had just happened. Then his hand came up behind her neck, pulling her closer, and he kissed her back with an intensity that stole her breath. It wasn't a gentle kiss or a cautious one. It was the kiss of someone who'd been holding back for too long, of two lonely souls finally finding each other. When they broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Luca rested his forehead against hers, his eyes dark in the night. "This makes everything more complicated," he said, his voice rough. "I know, if we cross this line, there's no going back. You'll be mine in ways that go far beyond protection. Do you understand?" Olivia looked into his eyes and saw everything he was saying and not saying. The danger, the commitment, the possession. "I understand." He kissed her again, gentler this time, like a promise. Everything felt perfect. Too perfect. And if Olivia had learned anything from her life, it was that when everything felt too perfect, the storm was always hiding somewhere on the horizon. That morning began like any other morning. The sky was a clear, flawless blue, golden sunlight spilling through the leaves and scattering dancing patches of light across the grass. Olivia stood by the studio window with a cup of coffee in her hand, watching Ethan and Bianca play tag around the fountain. Their laughter rang through the garden, bright and carefree, as if this world had never heard of darkness. Two guards stood not far away, eyes sweeping the area, but their posture was looser than usual. This was the Castellano estate, the safest place money and power could buy. No one would dare touch anything that belonged to Luca here, or at least that was what everyone believed. Luca had left early, a meeting with a partner on the south side of the city. He'd kissed Olivia's forehead before he went, a gesture that had become familiar over the past few weeks. "I'll be back before lunch," he'd said. "Don't let Ethan eat too many cookies." Olivia had smiled and nudged him toward the door. "Go, we'll be fine." Now she sat in the studio editing photos from a wedding she'd shot the week before. Freelance work still continued, even though she no longer needed the money with the same desperation. It was a choice now, not survival, and that difference made everything feel lighter. 10:30. She glanced at the clock, deciding she'd take a break and go out to the garden with Ethan. Maybe they'd pick flowers for Elena. Elena always loved bouquets Ethan chose with his own hands. Then the sound of dogs barking tore through the quiet. Not the normal barking when a guest arrived. This was violent, frantic barking coming from the estate's side gate. Olivia stood, her heart beginning to race for no clear reason. She hadn't even made it out of the studio before the door flew open. Victor burst in, his face drained as if he'd seen a ghost. "Olivia?" He panted, eyes wild. "Where's Ethan?" The world tilted under her feet. "In the garden, with Bianca." "There are 2 men watching. There's no one in the garden." Olivia ran. She couldn't remember how she ran. Only that a second later she was in the middle of the garden, her eyes sweeping everywhere for the familiar curl of her son's brown hair. Empty. The stone bench was empty. The swing was empty. Only Bianca stood crying by the fountain, shaking all over. Bianca Olivia dropped to her knees and gripped the little girl's shoulders. "Where's Ethan? Where is Ethan?" They took him." Bianca sobbed, tears streaming down her cheeks. "A black car. They shoved him in and drove away." "No, no, no." Olivia stood swaying. She screamed her son's name, the sound breaking apart, in the air echoing off the high walls of the estate. But there was no answer, only a cruel swallowing silence. The entire house plunged into chaos. Guards ran everywhere, radios crackling non-stop, the iron gates clanging shut, as if that still meant anything. Marco appeared first sober, in a way that felt unnatural, barking orders at his men like this was a battlefield. Elna sat frozen on the living room sofa, her face white as paper, her hands crushing a rosary, until her knuckles blanched. Her lips moved in soundless prayers, but her eyes were empty, as if she'd seen hell open again. Olivia didn't know how long she stood there. Minutes, maybe hours. Time lost its meaning when her son wasn't beside her. She only remembered the sound of a car tearing into the courtyard, the slam of a door, and heavy footsteps on the marble floor. Luca entered the living room, still in the suite from his morning meeting, but his tie had been loosened and his hair was disheveled, as if he'd raked his hands through it 100 times. His gaze found her instantly, and what she saw there made her knees buckle. Pain, fury, guilt, all of it held back behind a thin shell of control that was about to crack. He crossed the room in a few long strides, grabbed her shoulders, and made her look into his eyes. "I swear I'll bring Ethan back," he said, his voice trembling, even as his face stayed carved from stone, whatever it costs. Olivia couldn't remember if she nodded. She couldn't remember if she spoke or simply collapsed into his arms, letting him hold her weight when her legs no longer had the strength to stand. She remembered only one thing. Ethan's small handkerchief, the one with the dinosaur print he carried everywhere, was still lying on the stone bench in the garden. Left behind, alone, as if it was waiting for its owner to come back. A cold wind moved through the trees, carrying yellow leaves down onto the grass. And the peaceful world Olivia thought she'd found the world of children's laughter and midnight kisses and promises of a future, shattered in an instant, as if it had never existed at all. Olivia sat numb in the library, her back against the tall bookshelf, her eyes fixed on nothing at all. Ethan's small handkerchief lay in her hands, the soft fabric soaked now because she kept pressing it to her face, trying to find the familiar scent of her son. The smell of children's shampoo, the smell of grass and sunlight, the smell of afternoons playing in the garden that might never come back again. She didn't know how long she'd been sitting there, maybe an hour, maybe 3. Time became a meaningless concept when her child was out there somewhere, alone, terrified, and she couldn't do a thing to save him. Fast footsteps sounded in the hallway, and then Victor appeared in the doorway. His face was tight, his hand holding a phone, as if it were a bomb about to go off. "We got a message," he said, his voice hoarse. "From an unknown number, just a video file." Olivia sprang up and followed Victor into the living room, where Luca stood with Marco and several other men. Every gaze locked on the phone as Victor hit play. The screen lit, and Olivia's heart shattered. Ethan sat in a gray concrete room, no windows, only a single ceiling bulb, casting a weak yellow light. His hands were loosely tied with rope not too tight. He still wore the blue sweater Olivia had put on him that morning, the one with the dinosaur print Ethan loved most. His eyes were full of fear, wide and wet, but his mouth was set as if he was trying not to cry. Her 5-year-old boy was trying to be brave, and that hurt Olivia more than anything. Then a voice came through a man's voice, thick with a Russian accent, cold and emotionless, as if he were reading a grocery list instead of threatening a child's life. "Ethan won't be harmed if Luca Castellano knows how to behave." A hand entered the frame, holding up a sheet of white paper with sloppy handwritten words. 12 o'clock. Port access, no police, no Marco, or the boy dies. The video ended. The screen went black. Olivia covered her mouth with both hands, choking back the scream rising in her throat. She felt like she was about to faint, her knees shaking. The world spinning around her. Marco slammed his fist into the wall, the crack-loud blood seeping from his knuckles. "It can't be them," he snarled. "We drove them out of Chicago 5 years ago." Luca stood perfectly still, a stone statue in the middle of chaos. But his eyes told a different story, dark as a sky, before a storm full of contained rage and something deeper, something that looked like fear. "Alexei Volkov," he said at last, his voice calm in a way that was terrifying. "The same Russians who killed Bella, who killed Sophia." He stared at the black screen, his jaw locked. "They've come back." A heavy silence fell over the room. Olivia looked from Luca to Marco, from Marco to the other men. They all wore the same expression, tense and ready for war. This wasn't business anymore. This was hatred, stretching across nearly 2 decades, blood spilled, and lives taken a war Ethan had become a pawn in without ever knowing it. "Come with me," Luca said to Olivia, his tone allowing no refusal. "You should see this." She thought he'd lock her in some room, keep her safe, and in the dark, the way Mafia bosses did in movies. But instead he led her downstairs, through a heavy steel door, into a room she never would have imagined existed. An operations center. That was the only way to describe it. Monitors covered the wall, showing satellite feeds, heat maps, tactical diagrams. A control console lined with dozens of buttons and switches. Men in suits sat at computers, fingers flying headsets pressed tight. This was the command center of an underground empire, and Olivia was standing in the middle of it. Elena stood in the corner with a rosary in her hands, lips moving in soundless prayer. When she saw Olivia, she said nothing, only gave a small nod. Her eyes filled with the kind of pain she knew too well. "You wanted to know what my world looks like," Luca said, standing beside Olivia in front of the largest screen. "This is it." On the screen, a thermal satellite image showed an industrial building near the port on the south side of Chicago. Red and orange dots moved inside, representing human body heat. And in a far corner of the building, separated from the larger group, one small dot alone. "That's Ethan Victor," said, pointing to the lone bright dot. "We've confirmed the location." Olivia stared at that tiny point of light, her son alone in the dark, surrounded by people, willing to kill him For a war he didn't even know existed, Luca turned to her, his dark eyes meeting hers in the blue glow of the screen. His voice dropped into something like a vow, like the most sacred promise a man could make. "I'll bring him back. Do you trust me?" Olivia looked at him into eyes that had witnessed too much loss, carried too much guilt and regret. She saw the man who hadn't been able to save his sister, who hadn't been able to protect his niece, and she saw the man who would burn the world down to keep from failing again. "I trust you," she said, and for the first time in her life, she truly trusted someone besides herself. Night fell over the South Side Chicago port, like a black curtain dropping over a tragic stage. Olivia stood in the operations center, her eyes locked on the row of screens in front of her, afraid to blink for even a second. 6 monitors showed live footage from helmet cameras worn by the 6 members of the team. 6 different angles on the same hell where her son was being held. The 3rd screen from the left belonged to Luca. She recognized it immediately by the way he moved footsteps so light they seemed not to touch the ground, his body pressed close to the dark wall of the abandoned warehouse. In his hands was a glossy black gun, raised at chest level ready. This wasn't the Luca she knew from warm dinners or late-night kisses. This was Luca of the shadows, of the world she'd spent so long trying not to see. "Alpha Team breach in 60 seconds. Luca's voice came through the speakers, low and cold as steel. "All teams confirm ready, Bravo Team ready, Charlie Team ready, Delta Team ready." The voices echoed back through the comms system, a chorus of fighters preparing to step into battle. Olivia held her breath, fingernails digging into her palms hard enough to leave red marks, but she didn't feel pain. She didn't feel anything but suffocating fear and a thread of hope so thin it could snap. Breach. The world exploded into chaos. On the 6 screens, 6 doors were kicked in at the same time. Flashlight beams ripped through the dark, and gunfire cracked like thunder. Muzzle flashes flared in the night, lethal bursts of light illuminating the faces of men trying to fight back and failing. Luca's camera showed him moving with terrifying speed and precision. 2 men surged out from behind, stacked cargo crates guns, in hand mouths, shouting in Russian. Luca fired 3 shots, no hesitation, no tremor. Both dropped before they could pull a trigger. North corridor cleared, east side 2 targets down, central area secured. Reports came in non-stop, and on the heat map display, the red dots that marked the enemy vanished one by one. But the small bright dot in the far corner of the building was still there, still unmoving, and Olivia couldn't tear her eyes away from it. "Front office area," Lucas said into the radio, his voice steady, even though he'd killed less than half a minute ago. "Heat signature is still there, no movement." His camera showed a long hallway with a steel door at the end. He moved forward, gun up steps, slow and deliberate. Victor followed behind, his large frame blocking part of the view. 3, 2, 1. The door blew open under Luca's kick. The camera caught darkness and crashing furniture tables and chairs. Overturned papers scattering into the air, a moment stretched into forever, Olivia's heart seeming to stop her lungs, forgetting how to draw breath. Then the camera tilted down. Ethan was in the corner, curled on a wooden chair, his hands bound with rope duct tape across his mouth. Just like in the video, still wearing the blue dinosaur sweater. But now his eyes were wide, staring at Luca, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Then tears spilled down that small face. Olivia cried. She didn't even realize she was crying until Elena caught her because her knees had buckled without her noticing. On Luca's camera, he slid his gun into its holster and crossed the room in 3 long strides. The hands that had killed less than a minute ago now peeled the tape from Ethan's mouth with gentle care, as if he was afraid of hurting the boy even a little. Ethan Luca's voice came through the speakers, and for the first time that night it trembled. "It's me. You're safe now." Ethan stared at him for a long second, as if trying to confirm this wasn't a dream, that Luca was really there, that someone had come to save him. Then the boy lurched forward chair, and all trying to throw himself into Luca's arms, even with his hands still tied. Luca caught him one arm, holding him steady, while the other pulled a knife and cut the rope. Once the boy was free, Luca lifted Ethan up and pressed him tight to his chest, as if someone might rip him away if he loosened his grip. "I knew you'd come." Ethan's voice carried through the speakers, broken and shaking but full of trust. "They said nobody would, but I knew." In the operations center, Olivia collapsed against Elena's shoulder, sobbing without stopping. Her son was safe. Her son was coming home. Elena held her tight, and Olivia felt the older woman trembling too, crying too. "The boy is coming home." Elena whispered, her voice thick. "Both of you are coming home." On the screen, Luca walked out of the building with Ethan in his arms. The boy's face pressed to his chest, small arms wrapped tight around his neck, as if he never wanted to let go. They got into the vehicle and the camera feed cut off when the door shut, but Olivia still saw the last instant before the screen went dark. Luca bent down his forehead, touching Ethan's, his eyes closed. In that moment, he wasn't a mafia boss, not a killer, not a man who'd lost too much. He was simply a man who had finally saved someone he loved after so many years of failure. And maybe by saving Ethan, he'd saved himself too. Headlights swept across the iron gates, and Olivia ran into the front courtyard before the car had even fully stopped. She didn't remember how she opened the door, didn't remember how many steps she flew across. She only knew that a second later, the car door swung open, and Luca stepped out with Ethan in his arms. Her son. Alive, safe, real. She snatched him to her, crushed him to her chest, so tightly she was afraid she might squeeze the breath out of him, but she couldn't let go. Couldn't, wouldn't. Ethan's warmth seeped through the fabric of his clothes, his small heart pounding hard against her, and Olivia cried. She cried the way she'd never been allowed to cry, tears pouring without end. Her whole body shaking with sobs she couldn't stop. "Mom," Ethan's voice broke against her shoulder. Terrified and ragged, but soaked in relief. His small fingers clutched at her shirt, as if he was afraid that if he let go, she'd disappear. "I'm here, baby," Olivia whispered into his hair, kissing the crown of his head, his forehead, his cheek, anywhere she could reach. "I'm here. I've got you. You're safe now." She didn't know how long she stood there holding her son in the courtyard of the estate under a cold moon and distant stars. Maybe minutes, maybe a lifetime. Time didn't mean anything when she was holding the most precious thing in her life. When she finally looked up, Luca was still there, a few steps away, silent as the night. His clothes were dusty and smelled of gunpowder dried blood on his sleeve, his face exhausted with fresh bruises. But in those dark eyes, Olivia saw something she'd never seen before. Peace, as if a weight of 1,000 pounds had finally been set down. "Thank you," she said, her voice rough from too much crying. Luca shook his head, his gaze darkening. Don't thank me. This happened because of me. Because I made you visible. Because they knew taking the boy would hurt me. She looked at him, at the man blaming himself for other people's crimes. And in that moment she understood that he'd been living like this for 19 years. Blaming himself for Bella. Blaming himself for Sophia. Carrying guilt like an invisible shackle around his neck. She stood Ethan still in her arms and stepped forward to hug Luca. He went rigid for a second, as if he wasn't used to being comforted instead of comforting someone else. Then his arms closed around both of them, drawing them in with a gentleness she didn't know could exist in a man like him. They stood there, the three of them, in the cold courtyard. Luca holding Olivia, Olivia holding Ethan. Ethan between them, safe and protected. For the first time they felt like a family. Elena appeared at the front door, stepping out on trembling legs. She didn't speak. She only laid a hand on Luca's shoulder, her eyes filled with tears. But on her mouth was a smile, the first real smile Olivia had seen. Since meeting her, the smile of a mother watching her son finally find peace. I love you, Olivia, said suddenly, without thinking, without preparing. The words spilled out, as if they'd been waiting too long to be spoken. I don't know what we are. I don't know where this is going. But I know I love you, and I'm not leaving. Luca looked at her, and she saw the wall of control he'd built over so many years finally collapse. He lifted a hand to her cheek, his thumb wiping away the tears that still clung there. I love you too, he said, his voice low and certain. Both of you. And I promise you won't have to face anything alone again. They brought Ethan inside, and Olivia sat on the bed beside her son, until he drifted into sleep, his small fingers still gripping hers, even in his dreams. She watched his peaceful face, tear tracks drying on his cheeks, and felt a love so fierce it hurt. But beneath the relief and the happiness, one question began to gnaw at her mind. How had Volkov found Ethan? The Castellano estate was a fortress, layers of security and guards everywhere. How did they know exactly when he'd be in the garden, when the guards would be distracted, when the side gate wouldn't be watched? Who told them the next morning arrived in a heavy, unnatural quiet. Olivia sat beside Ethan's bed watching her son sleep, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm beneath the white blanket. She hadn't slept all night. She couldn't close her eyes for even a second, terrified that if she did, she'd wake up and discover it had all been a dream, that her son was still out there somewhere, alone and afraid. Luca had left the room early, his face tight with lines of worry she'd never seen on him before. He'd kissed her forehead, murmured that there were things he needed to handle, then vanished into the dark hallway. Olivia knew something was happening, something he wasn't ready to tell her yet. A soft knock made her look up. Victor stood in the doorway, his face as unreadable as always, but there was something in his eyes that set her on edge. The boss needs you in the library, he said, his voice low and grave. Olivia looked at Ethan one more time, then rose and followed Victor. They moved through long corridors, their footsteps echoing in the morning stillness. When she stepped into the library, she saw Luca standing in front of a large screen, his back to the door. He didn't turn when she entered. He only stood there, rigid as stone. You found something, Olivia said. Not a question. Victor, play it. Luca answered, his voice without emotion. The screen lit with security footage, an angle from the warehouse where Ethan had been held. but the timestamp in the corner froze Olivia's blood. 3 hours before the abduction. The video showed a man walking up to a side door of the building, speaking to someone inside whom the camera couldn't catch. The man wore a black coat, a familiar build, familiar gestures. Then he turned, and the camera captured the profile of his face. Marco Castellano. Olivia felt as if someone had punched her in the stomach. He was there before Ethan was taken, she whispered, her voice breaking. He set it all up, Victor said, his tone like ice. Fed them what they needed, the boys' schedule, security gaps, pickup routines, everything they needed to get into the estate. Olivia turned to Luca. He still stood there, not shouting, not breaking things, not doing anything at all. Only standing with his hands clenched at his sides, knuckles white from the force of it. "My brother," he said finally, and his voice was a whisper made of pain. "My own brother." The library door opened and Elna came in, her face drained, her eyes wild. She'd heard. "Luca," she said, trembling. "Tell me I didn't just hear what I think I heard." Luca turned to face his mother, and Olivia saw the grief in his eyes, deep and untouchable. "Marco betrayed us, Mother. He gave the Russians what they needed to take Ethan." "No." Elena shook her head, refusing the truth. "He wouldn't do that, not after Sophia. He knows what it feels like to lose a child." "That's exactly why he did it," Luca said, bitter. "He wanted me to feel what he felt. He wanted me to understand his pain." The library door opened again, and 2 guards brought Marco in. This time he was sober, no smell of alcohol, no unsteady sway. He stood tall, his eyes cold, as he looked around the room like this was a trial whose verdict he'd already known. Elena stepped in front of her youngest son, hands shaking, tears filling her eyes. "Tell me they're wrong," she pleaded. "Tell me you didn't do this." Marco smiled a crooked, bitter smile. "Which child?" "The one Luca's using to replace Sophia." Olivia stepped forward, fury flaring in her chest, even as she tried to contain it. "You used my son to punish your brother. You made a deal with the men who killed your own daughter." Marco looked at her with contempt. Luca needed to know what it feels like. Powerless, watching someone you love disappear. But Luca saved him. Olivia said, her voice colder than she thought she could make it. "Your plan failed. All you proved is that you really are as broken as everyone feared." Marco's eyes darkened and he lunged at her. But Luca was faster. In one blurred motion, he intercepted Marco, slammed him into the wall, his hand locking around his brother's throat. "Don't even breathe toward her." Each word was a threat, a promise of violence. Luca, Elena said, her voice weak, but still carrying authority. "Let your brother go." Luca held him there a long moment, his hand still crushing Marco's throat, his body shaking with contained rage. Then he released him and stepped back, letting Marco slide to the floor, coughing and gasping. Elena moved forward and knelt beside her youngest son. She cupped Marco's face, forcing him to look into her eyes. "I love you," she said, trembling but certain. "I have always loved you. But what you've done I can't forgive. Not yet. Maybe not ever." She rose, looking down at him through tears. "You are my son, but you are not welcome in this house again until you make this right." Marco looked at his mother, and for the first time Olivia saw something like regret flicker across his face. But it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by stubborn pride. "He's going to London," God said, his voice calm in a way that was frightening. "A one-way ticket, 6 months of money. After that, he's on his own." He stepped closer to Marco, looking down at him with eyes like ice. "I'm letting you live. That's more mercy than you deserve." The guards hauled Marco to his feet and dragged him out. Marco didn't fight, didn't speak. He only looked back once, before he disappeared through the doorway. Olivia stood by the window, watching a silver car roll quietly down the gravel drive, carrying the man who had nearly destroyed everything she loved. When the car vanished beyond the iron gate, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders, and also a deep sorrow for this family, for wounds that would never fully heal. 3 months passed like smooth water after a storm. The Castellano estate was no longer a place of temporary shelter. It had become home. Olivia woke each morning to sunlight spilling through the curtains, birdsong in the garden, and Luca's warmth beside her. A new kind of normal, if anything in this world could be called normal. Ethan went to a private school nearby, where security had been quietly increased in ways no one talked about, where Victor or one of Luca's men always parked 2 blocks from the school gate. The boy made new friends, laughed more, and little by little, he began to forget the cold concrete room where he'd once been held. The nightmares still came, sometimes late at night, when the dark felt too heavy and memory too sharp. But when they came, Ethan didn't run to Olivia anymore. He padded down the hallway, pushed open the door to Luca's office, and climbed onto the sofa where the man often worked late. Luca would set his laptop aside, lift the boy up, and sit there with Ethan in his arms until the fear passed. No one spoke, no one needed to. Olivia had turned the sunroom into her own studio with equipment Luca had bought for her, even though she'd insisted she didn't need anything that expensive. She took selective clients, now high-end weddings, family portraits, corporate events. Her portfolio grew thicker, her name spread wider. She no longer counted every dollar in her wallet, no longer lay awake, worrying about rent or the electric bill. But she still worked because photography was passion, not burden, because she refused to become a woman who lived on a man, no matter how much that man loved her. Luca and Olivia didn't marry, not yet. They'd never talked about it, and Olivia wasn't sure she wanted or needed a piece of paper to define what they had. They shared a bed every night, shared meals every day, shared the responsibility of raising a growing boy. That was family, already paperwork or not. Every evening, Luca taught Ethan Italian. They sat in the library, heads bent, it's over bilingual picture books, and Olivia would hear laughter spill out when Ethan mispronounced a word, and Luca patiently corrected him. Buonanotte for good night. Mi manchi for I miss you. Ti voglio bene for I love you. Then one night, about 2 months after everything happened, Ethan looked up at Luca and said, "Good night, Papa." Luca went completely still for a full minute. Olivia, standing in the doorway, watched the expression on his face change. From surprise to disbelief to something soft and fragile she'd never seen on this man before. He didn't say a word. He only pulled Ethan close, and Olivia could have sworn she saw his eyes shine wet in the lamplight. Elena changed too. She no longer looked at Ethan with pain and longing, no longer saw Sophia's shadow in every one of the boy's smiles. Now it was pure joy, the joy of a grandmother handed a second chance she'd never dared to dream of. She taught Ethan how to cook pasta, took him out to pick herbs in the garden, told stories about faraway Italy that held the boy spellbound. Everything seemed peaceful. It seemed safe. It seemed like they'd finally found happiness. Then Victor stepped into Luca's office with the tight expression Olivia had learned to recognize. "We have news from Europe," he said, setting a tablet down on the desk. "Alexei Volkov has been found dead in Prague. Not natural causes. Assassinated clean and professional." Olivia looked at Luca. His face stayed blank, but she saw his jaw lock. "Any signature?" he asked. "A symbol," Victor replied. "Spray paint on a wall. A crown over 2 crossed swords. The Bellini family. Bellini Luca," repeated his voice dropping. "Organized Italian crime out of Naples," Victor continued. "They've been hitting Russian interests across Europe for 6 months. By killing Volkov, they're sending a message. To whom? To you," Victor said. "Either an offer of alliance or notice that they intend to fill the power vacuum." Luca rose and walked to the window that looked out over the garden. Outside, Ethan and Bianca were chasing each other around the fountain, their laughter drifting in as if from another world. Olivia went to Luca and laid her hand on his arm. "It never stops, does it?" she asked softly. "One threat ends, another begins." Luca didn't look at her, his eyes still following Ethan outside. "No, it doesn't stop. This is my world." Olivia tightened her grip on his arm, making him turn and face her. "Then it's my world too now." He studied her for a long moment, searching her eyes for something. Hesitation, fear, regret. But he found nothing except resolve and love. And for the first time since the news about the Bellinis arrived, Luca let himself breathe out. The invitation arrived that morning, delivered by hand by a man in a black suit with a thick Italian accent. The Bellini family wanted to negotiate. They proposed a face-to-face meeting tonight at a neutral restaurant on the north side of the city. Luca read the letter in silence, his expression blank, but Olivia had learned how to read what lived beneath that calm. He had to go. Refusing would be seen as weakness, and in this world, weakness meant death. Before he left, Luca came to find Olivia in the studio. She was editing photos from a wedding she'd shot the weekend before. The blue glow of the screen casting light across her focused face. When she heard his footsteps, she turned and one look was enough. "You need to handle this," she said. Luca nodded slightly. "I do," he answered, his voice low. "It could take all night. Are you safe as I can be in my world?" Olivia stood and reached for his hand. Her fingers laced through his and tightened a promise that didn't need words. "Then go," she said. "Do what you have to do. We'll be here when you come back." Luca bent to kiss her, a long, deep kiss, as if he was trying to memorize the taste of her in case this was the last time. "I love you," he said when he pulled back. "I love you too. So don't do anything stupid. Define stupid. Anything that keeps you from coming home to us." He smiled small but real, then turned away. Olivia stood at the window and watched the black car disappear beyond the gates, and she prayed to whoever might be listening that he'd come back safe. That evening, Olivia and Ethan ate dinner with Elena. They cooked pasta together, Ethan standing on a chair to help his grandmother stir the sauce. The kitchen filled with laughter and the scent of garlic and basil. After dinner, they watched a movie in the living room, buttered popcorn in big bowls, warm blankets across their legs. Ethan fell asleep on Olivia's lap before the movie ended, his breathing steady and peaceful. The clock ticked on, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, nearly midnight. Elena had gone to bed long ago, but Olivia still sat there, fingers stroking her son's hair, eyes fixed on the dark window. 11:43. Headlights swept through the curtains. Olivia gently laid Ethan down on the sofa and ran to the front door before the car had even stopped. Luca stepped out, tired lines around his eyes, and his tie loosened but whole. No blood, no wounds, just him coming back to her like he'd promised. "It's done," he said, pulling her into his arms. "Bellini wants an alliance. They'll control operations in Europe while I maintain American territory. No conflict, no competition." "Are we safe?" Olivia asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Safer. There will always be risk. But this removes the biggest threat." They stood in the garden under the stars after Victor carried Ethan up to bed, and the estate had fallen asleep. Night wind moved gently through the rose bushes, carrying sweet scent and the promise of calmer days ahead. "Since when did you become this brave, Luca?" asked, his hand brushing her hair. "Since the day I realized running doesn't keep us safe." "You could still leave," he said, serious. "A new identity, a new life, somewhere they'd never think to look. And never see Elena spoil Ethan with pastries again. Never watch you teach him Italian, just disappear and pretend none of it happened." Olivia shook her head. "We'd live, we'd be safe, but we'd be lonely." She lifted her hand to his face, making him look at her. "Ethan has already lost enough. Now he's finally found a family. You want me to rip that away from him?" Luca was quiet for a long moment, dark eyes shining under starlight. Then he spoke low and certain, like an oath. "I can't promise I'll never hurt you, but if you stay, I promise you won't face anything alone again." "Then I'm staying," Olivia said, without hesitation. "I choose you. I choose this family. I choose this world with all its darkness because you're in it." Luca pulled her close and kissed her under the stars, and Olivia knew this was home. Not the mansion with its high walls and iron gates, not wealth or power, but this embrace, this man, this family she'd found by accident on the most desperate day of her life. Life doesn't always give us perfect choices, but it gives us chances, precious chances, to choose what matters most. Olivia walked into a cafe in desperation and loneliness. She found something she never expected, a man whose protection came with invisible chains, but whose love set her free. They weren't safe. They would never be completely safe. But they were together. They were choosing this. And sometimes choosing is its own kind of victory. Upstairs on the second floor of the estate, Ethan slept peacefully, curly brown hair spread across his pillow, his face calm in his dreams. He slept with the quiet certainty of someone who knew he was protected and loved by a mother who fought for him and a man willing to burn the whole world down to keep him safe. The end. Our story ends here, but the lessons it leaves behind will remain. This is a story about the courage of a mother, about love that breaks through every barrier, and about finding family in the most unexpected places. Olivia taught us that sometimes stepping out of our comfort zone is the only way to truly be safe. That loving someone doesn't mean life will be perfect. It means being willing to face every imperfection together. And that family isn't always the people who share our blood, it's the people who choose to stand beside us when times are hardest. My dear friends, if this story touched your heart, please hit the subscribe button so you won't miss the moving stories we share every day. Press like if you believe in second chances in life, and share this video with anyone who needs a little hope. We'd truly love to hear how you feel. What do you think about Olivia and Luca's story? Have you ever had to make hard decisions to protect the people you love in real life? Do you believe love can overcome every barrier? Leave a comment below and share what's on your heart. We read every comment and we value each and every one of your thoughts. Finally, we wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace each day. No matter how hard life gets, please remember there's always light at the end of the tunnel, and sometimes the very best things come from the most unexpected beginnings. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. Goodbye and see you in the next video.